Hey, Starly here. Today I'll be going over how you can set up your comic in Clip Studio Paint so it will always look professional and pleasing for your readers. I'll also have some templates you can download for free, link in the description, but you'll want to watch this video first to know how to use them. To start a new comic, go to File, New, and it will bring up this screen where we have a few different options for projects, and below are options on how to set up that project. Today we'll be making comics, so I'll focus on the different comic options. There are 4 of them: webtoon, comic, printing a fanzine, and show all comic settings. Let's explore the first one, which is webtoon. Below the project type, we will see these first 3 options remain the same throughout. So you can name your file here, choose where to save it, and select a preset. For webtoon, there are 4 presets. The value we want to first pay attention to is the width. Which width you choose will depend on where you upload it. For example, webtoon allows a width of 800 pixels, while Tapas allows a width of 940 pixels. And Global Comics does not have a width restriction, so I would recommend around the same size. Since our webtoon will be in color, we won't have issues resizing, so it's best to choose the biggest size of 1600 pixels. You always want to choose a bigger size and then resize down to ensure you don't have quality issues. Resizing up will cause pixelation, so it's best to avoid doing so whenever possible. Now we can look at the height. 20,000 seems like a lot of pixels, but this is the typical size of one webtoon page, so to speak. If we skip down here a sec, you can see you can also make multiple webtoon pages. This will be like a book of multiple webtoon pages, so they'll be individual files. And then you can upload them in order. You can also choose to make page divisions instead. So remember, this one is dividing and this one is multiplying. At this part, you will have to decide what you are comfortable with and what fits best for your comic. If you're unsure, just start out smaller since it will be less overwhelming and you can always add more later. Now the most important part here is the resolution. And you can see there are a bunch of different options here. 72 dpi is used for images on the web, but even though we are creating a webtoon which will only be online, not printed, we still want to use a high resolution when drawing this. After all, we can use panels to create graphics and such later on, and maybe one day we will want to publish our webtoon and will need a high resolution for printing. 300 dpi is the standard, but Clip Studio Paint offers a 350 dpi resolution. I like to use the 350 since it allows for a little bit of cushion room. You really don't need to use any higher than this since the file would be ridiculous to work with and it doesn't make much if any difference. Next is the basic expression color. I don't think there are many webtoons out there that are made as a black and white or grayscale webtoon. The vast majority are in color, so I recommend we stick with color for this project. If you do want to make your comic in black and white, I think it's better to create it in a page format first, especially if you plan to use comic tones, since it will be easier to resize and avoid moire patterns. I'll get into that more later in the video. Paper color. Let's leave this as white, and now we can add a template here. Now if I click this, you will see all these templates come up here. As you can see, these are all for page format comics, since comic pages have to be set up in very specific ways to avoid printer issues. Webtoons don't have these issues, but you can still load up the webtoon template from the freebies. Now I'll quickly show how to add the template so it will show up in the template list. After you have downloaded the template, open it up. Now go to Edit, Register Material, Template. Now we can name our material, let's call it Webtoon. Don't worry about these other options here. Let's go to choose the save location. Click the drop-down menu for all materials, then manga material, and select framing template. Next, we'll want to enter a tag here so we can more easily find it again when we need to. I'll add one and call it template. So that's pretty straightforward. You can add more here, so add whatever works for you and click OK. Now I'll go back to File, New, click on Webtoon, click on Template, and I'll scroll all the way down and select the template and click OK. Before I create this and go into the templates, I'll explain about the other sections for projects up here. Next is comic. And as you can see, there is a lot more info here, and this may be very intimidating, or you may think you don't need to know these things, but it is good to know what is available and what is the most important. This is especially critical if you plan to print your comic, since there is some terminology to know, but don't worry, we can easily learn these things, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. I'm always happy to help answer your questions. There is a preset drop-down menu here, so you can easily choose the size that works for you. There are color and monochrome options available. If you plan to do a black and white comic, please make sure to choose monochrome. There are different A and B sizes here, and these are based on different size papers, and the higher the number, the smaller the size. Also, A sizes are smaller than B sizes. I'll put a visual on the screen here for reference, and you can easily find this in a Google search too. I like to use B4 size, so I'll use that for this tutorial. B4 size is the typical size used by manga artists in Japan. You can also set the paper size here, as well as change the width and the height, but I'll leave these as is for now. Here we have the bleed width, and when I click this menu, it gives 3mm or 5mm options. Now, this is fine if I'm printing my comic at B4 size, but I'm not going to be doing that. I'll be resizing it smaller before print, so this means the bleed here is actually not accurate. If I resize this in half, the bleed would also be resized in half to only 2.5mm, and that's not enough bleed. Because of this, I actually don't use this project type. Instead, I will click this option for Show All Comic Settings. This has all the same options, but gives us more control over them. Now, if you look at my binding size, you can see my bleed width is 10mm. This means when I resize this in half, the bleed will be the correct 5mm. Now you want to make sure your canvas size is 20mm more than the binding finish size. Since the bleed width is 10 and each side will have 10mm of bleed, we need it to be 20mm. If it's more than this, there will be extra space around the canvas that's pointless and unnecessary and will require cropping later. So I find it's better to just have the exact dimensions, and for this page, I'll make sure it's 277 by 384. I'll also make sure my basic expression color is set to monochrome, since I'll be making my comic in black and white, and set it to 600 DPI. 600 DPI is good for black and white comics because the edges will be a little bit pixelated, so when we resize it down, this will prevent any sort of pixelation. At 350 DPI is not quite enough to avoid the pixelation, and I believe the 1200 DPI is a little bit overkill, though not necessarily a bad choice either. Now I'll click template and choose the one for black and white comic. Now you can also see when I choose monochrome, this default frequency option has also appeared. This is just referring to what frequency your comic tones will be set to by default. Comic tones is an entire video on its own, so I won't get into them now, but we'll choose 50. Going back down now to the default border inner size. This is basically the safe area for your comic. I'll show more about this when I go over the template. If you scroll down here, you can also check multiple pages. The printing a fanzine project option is pretty similar to this, so again, I'm just going to stay on this project type. If you don't know the number of pages, that's okay. Just remember when you print your book that it needs to be in multiples of 4. If it isn't exact, no worries, you can just add in bonus pages to reach the correct number. In this View drop-down menu, you can choose page by page or webtoon. I think for webtoon it's easier to just use the webtoon project settings, so for this one I'll just keep it as page by page. You can also combine 2-page spreads here, but I feel it's easier to do that afterwards, so let's keep that turned off for now. Of course, if your comic will be entirely 2-page spreads, you can turn this on now. Now we can choose the binding point. If your comic is read left to right, then you'll use left binding, and use right binding if it will be right to left. The first page will be on the right side for a left to right comic, and on the left side for a right to left comic. I'll be making mine left to right, so I'll leave these options as is. Now we can add a cover page. This can also be in black and white or color. I like to make mine in color, so I'll leave this as color. And we can choose a template for the color page. For the cover page layout, we want it to start with just 1 page instead of a 2-page spread. Even if you're drawing as part of an anthology, it's unlikely for a story to start with a 2-page spread. And typically, each chapter will end on a 2-page spread. I don't usually follow this rule personally when I'm writing my story, but you may want to for your story. This means for a multi-chapter graphic novel, there will be a blank page when one chapter ends and the next one begins. Usually on those pages you'll see like a title or a little doodle. Check out some of your favorite manga to see what I mean. Next is the story information. And you can fill this out if you want to, but I usually just skip it. And lastly here is the folio info. So this will add numbers to your comic pages, but this is not something I use, so I'll just skip it. If I wanted to add page numbers, I would actually do that when I'm creating the book itself, and that way I have more control over it. Now we can finally click OK and load our project. I've loaded both a multi-page comic and a multi-page webtoon here, so we can see the differences, but they are going to be very similar. Let's take a look at the webtoon. To open up a page, I just double click on it. Now you can see in my layers I have a bunch of different folders here, and these are pretty straightforward. So we have a folder for sketches, background, flat colors, line art, etc. At the very top I also have a folder for text, and for sound effects and bubbles. I also use Wild Words for my font, so if you don't have it, you will have to switch to a different font. I like to keep a layer for word bubbles since I prefer to manually draw my word bubbles rather than using Clip Studio Paint's balloon tool. I'm just personally not a fan of it. But please use it if it does work for your comic in your style. We also have a frame border folder here, and we can use the frame border tool to split this up. Clip Studio Paint also allows for making each panel its own folder, but I feel that creates a lot of folders and layers, so I prefer to keep them in the one frame border folder. Feel free to move these layers around in whatever ways work for your style and your process. And then you can save it as a new template and then add it to your materials so then you can use it again as your very own custom template. Now let's go to the multi-page comic. For this one we have a cover page, an inside cover page, and then our main pages. Then we have a back cover inside and a back cover page. You may want to skip these or leave them intentionally blank depending on how you want to lay out the pages of your comic. These inside pages would just be for printing, so when you upload your comic to the web, you would usually just skip these over. I can add more pages here as well. Now, when I add new pages, you can see that they do not use the template. If they were using the template, you would see the little text box like in this page. So I'm going to delete these pages. And then I will add new pages using the Add Page Advance. And this will bring up a new dialog box. And here we can choose the template. And now you can see these use the template. Now I'll open the color cover page and a black and white page. You can see the layers are a bit similar here. The color page template includes folders for the line art and colors, just like our webtoon template. For the black and white page, instead of folders, I mostly just use layers. I don't need as many layers since the way I like to look at black and white is like it's binary. Like everything is either on or off. So I have the line art layer, and underneath a layer for white color and a layer for black color. Sometimes I'll also move the white layer above the line art if I have a lot of effects in white. I also have a couple of comic tones already here. I like to use just these two for the majority of tones, so I keep them here. I also have a background raster layer and a background vector layer. The BG just stands for background. I do the majority of backgrounds as vectors, and I have a short video series going over how to use vectors, link in the corner and in the description to check out after these videos. The video series teaches you everything you need to know about vectors, and it's less than an hour long, so you can learn very quickly. Sometimes a raster layer is necessary for backgrounds though, since effects work better as rasters, or if I want to fill the background with black color, I can't do that on a vector layer, so I do it on a raster layer. You may have also noticed I have my frame border folder inside of its own folder. I do this for when I have art on top of the frames. Let me show an example. You can see I have a folder here called Top Art, and within it a line art layer. On my folder containing the frame border folder, I have a mask added to it. Now if I turn this mask off, you can see the frame lines now appear. The frame border folder already has a mask, so that's why I have to put it in its own folder, and then I can turn this mask on. Next, I'll be going over how to combine two pages into a splash page. A splash page is just a double page spread where the artwork crosses over the two pages. It's important to remember that the first page of the spread will always be an even number. To combine in Clip Studio Paint, click on the first page, then go to Story, Combine Pages. I'm not sure if these are the default settings, but mine are set to have the align crop mark checked on and the gap set to 20 millimeters. Then click OK. Now you can see we have the combined pages here and a set of layer for each page. But we only need one set since this is now essentially one page. So you can delete the folder for just one of the pages and then adjust the frame and masks for the other page. When drawing on this page, be mindful of the binding here. Don't put any character faces or text here since it will look weird and cut off when you print it. If you don't use the multi-page comic option but prefer working with individual files, that's okay. I have made a template for a splash page as well, so you can use this one too. Don't forget to grab the download for these templates, link in the description. And actually, I've got a few more templates as well. I have some for character sheets and posters, and I'll make a separate quick video for those, so be sure to check out that video and grab those templates too. All of them are free. I'll leave a link to that video in the corner here and in the description too. Edit them as needed, load them up, and save time not having to set up a page or character sheet every single time you create one. If you enjoy learning about making comics and are looking to improve more, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe so your comic making process becomes easier and faster. Leave a comment with any thoughts or questions and I'll be happy to answer. Let's have our comic making journey be easy and fun.